Andy and I fought over who could do this, and I lost. Actually, I won. We both have known Dexter for some years. I met Dexter when I was on the faculty of the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, and I've enjoyed the association over the years. But I'll read his bio here. He's a research staff member of the Institute for Defense Analyses, where he specializes in manpower, personnel, and training issues. He holds graduate degrees in computer science and educational psychology from Stanford. Whereas a research associate, he directed numerous projects for the Institute for Mathematical Studies and the Social Sciences. I'll add an aside there. One of the first articles that I came up with in looking at technology and education appeared in Scientific American in 1968, written by Patrick Suppies, who was your advisor?
Yes, sir.
So,
he and Atkinson.
And
I suffered under both of them.
Under both. But he's held academic positions in psychology, educational psychology, computer science, and systems engineering. Government positions, he's worked at the Navy and Army Service Laboratories, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. That's the group that worked with Al Gore in inventing the internet. You've heard of DARPA.
But it was really Dexter that did it.
Yeah, Al Gore said it was him, but it was really Dexter.
Working in the shadows.
Also at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. He served on various science and technology panels, including those of the Defense Science Board. In fact, you all met at the Academy one year. I remember seeing you.
Yeah, we did.
You were wandering the halls there.
Yeah.
The Army Science Board, Naval Studies Board, Air Force Scientific Advisory Board, the National Academy of Engineering, and the National Research Council. He's published widely and has served on the editorial boards of professional journals in psychology, wisely as well, yeah, we'll add. Psychology, instruction, and human factors. He's designed computer-based instruction programs used in public schools and training devices used in military training. And I find this also impressive. He's an elected fellow of the American Educational Research Association and 3 divisions of the American Psychological Association. And the connection that I've had is work that he did with, starting in the mid-1980s, working with the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative in the Department of Defense, working with Gary Boykin there and soon thereafter Philip Dodds to establish a program to carry out the vision that they set up in those early days. Those efforts finally launched ADL in late 1997. And then he adds here, since then he has sought the relative peace offered by harmless drudgery in research and analyses, some of which involves assessing DARPA's digital tutor, which you're going to talk to us about today.
Thanks very much. I had no idea. I had written some of that stuff out, but I didn't know that I hadn't intended for us to read it all. And now that our time is out, I think perhaps we can. I'll say a few things about it. Anyways, thanks very much. It's good to be involved. And I will charge ahead. I want to say something about the Institute for Defense Analyses. This is because, okay, who do we have here? Do we have some, I know we have some faculty here, and they are going to go on to become eminent research professors in endowed chairs, so I'm not worried about them. But how many graduate students do we have here? And how many of you are doctoral students? Okay, cool. The reason I mention that is because when there may come a point when you want to go out and try to find, enter the cold, cool world out there. And one of the places that you might look are things called FFRDCs. Now you'll think of government and you'll think of private, and this is something that's neither fish nor fowl. It's right in the middle. So it's a federally funded research and development center. And they're all captive of some government agency. In our case, we work for the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And the only thing we do are studies and analyses. So we gallop across the top of everybody else's research and try to make sense of it, because there's a day in the near future, like Tuesday, somebody is going to make a decision. And it's our job to inform that decision with the best science and technological information that's available. So that's what we do. And these decisions matter, particularly in the Department of Defense. They involve money and, lives. But there are others. If you don't want to work for defense, there are other FFRDCs around all the other agencies. And so you might want to give that a look, because they don't often tend to come, they're not something that would easily occur to you. Okay, enough of that. Just wanted to let you know about those things. So I'm going to say something about tutorial instruction and a few other topics. So briefly, I would like to say that for the last, there's something called, the anthropologists called behavioral modernity. I think I pronounced it right. And that has to do with how we began to develop the cultural practices that we now use. One of which is, of course, instruction. How do they give instruction back 100,000 years ago or so? Well, if you ask the anthropologists, they say that it's going to be through tutoring. So this is far more recent than 100,000 years. Those of you who know the anthropology will, but I haven't found the right picture for it. The notion is this is a way we've learned forever, so we're about 3,000 years ago. We began to gather in groups, larger than one-on-one tutoring for instruction. So this is Raphael's idea of Plato's academy. It's the academy. I don't know where the trees are in these, if you know where it got its name. But anyways, this is the, but the Italian Renaissance thought the academy would look like. But you'll notice there's still one-on-one discussions going on all over the place. And so we have a sort of crowdsourced approach to instruction. I wonder where to put these. Oh, well, yeah. So, what this suggests, however, to me, is that there may be three revolutions in instruction. Maybe more, depending on how you want to slice and dice it. But okay, let's say three. First one is when we started to write. That's phonetic writing, in which we tried to capture the speech of an individual in some sort of, so that people didn't have to go seek out a sage in order to learn something, which is nice to have. If you could carry around, those clay tablets are pretty heavy, and the codices after that were pretty expensive, but nonetheless, you didn't have to go find the man in order, the person, say, to learn something. Okay, the next revolution that came along was this business of books. The Chinese came up with a removable type in about 1000, and there was this fellow named Gutenberg, who I suspect you all have heard of, came along a little later. But they made the content, this content up here, affordable, which was the big point. Gave birth to the middle class and all of that. And again, I suspect this is history that you're all familiar with. So that was a nice step forward. So once more, you don't have to go to the sage. You don't have to carry around clay tablets, but you can go, and you can actually afford to get this learning, which means, people who didn't have a lot of money in the class and others could learn. Finally, along comes technology. All right. To pick your date, 1947, University of Pennsylvania, 1950, you want to go back to the Iowa system that was based on relays, take your pick. Somewhere around that time we invented the computer. And there we not only have something that is affordable, you've got cell phones, you've got computers, but affordable tutorial content and tutorial interaction is now made available anytime, anywhere. So in a sense, it's back to the future, right? We're going back to that tutorial one-on-one kind of training that we had long ago, but it seems to be something that is valuable. Bloom showed that some value. He was talking about 2 standard deviations of difference, and I'll say a little more about all that, but I'm not going to say much more about Bloom. There's many questions to be asked about his studies. But I'll show you some other studies that indicate the kind of interactions we may be, kind of successes we may be getting with this kind of approach. Yes, sir.
When you talk about tutorial interaction, are you talking about interaction with content? Are you talking about interaction with a system that delivers content? Are you talking about interaction with a human who provides access to content, or all of those things, or?
Basically, I'm talking about cloning human tutorial capabilities in silicon or arsenide, or you name it, whatever's going to come along. And I think, if we stick with the von Neumann architecture, which is, all digital, everything zeros and ones, there got to be some limitations, that you cannot do with computers. And determining what those limitations are remains a task for research. Nonetheless, there is still plenty of reason for people to gather in groups either for learning or for camaraderie or for support, for all of those reasons. And it applies to adults as well as children. You know, we train a lot of adults as well, and we found that necessary. Yes, sir.
Well, because part of the reason that I asked that is because the technology, the technology facilitates system interaction, right? Or interaction with a computer system that also facilitates mediated interaction, which reduces the cost of human interaction. So we could have done this with you still back in Washington, D.C. or wherever, you know, back at the Defense Institute, whereas we couldn't do that before. But it's still an interaction with you, not an interaction with a system.
If I had been reliably cloned, which you'd all regret, but okay, if I had been reliably cloned, it could have been one-on-one. You could have just had this conversation. What are you going to talk about, Dexter? Oh, I know all that stuff. And why do I have to know? You know, we could have a tutorial conversation. And indeed. And why don't we do that anyways? Why isn't all our instruction tutorial? And the answer, of course, is you put your finger on it. We can't afford it. We cannot afford a single human tutor for every single learner. But we can afford an awful lot of computing for every learner we're finding out. And you know, the last time I looked, Moore's Law, which is this wonderful everything doubles and the power and all that doubles every 18 months, is likely, according to the recent survey of IEEE fellows, it's likely to continue for another 15 years for sure, and very likely for another 30 years. So it's just, you know, we're in an amazing age. You all will get to see it. I envy you for. So anyway, this is something to consider, and this, I think we really are into on the verge of a major revolution in learning. Who knows if it's going to be equivalent to these, but I think it's a big deal. So Andy, you know, whatever you say about him, he's still on the right track. Okay, computer, some more, I think there's some ancient history I wanted to get out of the way. There is a long history of computing, trying to teach, going back actually to the late 1950s. There are papers and so forth produced from those days. A lot of it followed this kind of paradigm. There's a fellow named Keller who produced this thing called Personalized System for Instruction, PSI. And in PSI, what you did is you modularize everything, and then you test before somebody enters the module, and then when they complete the module, if they pass it, they skip the module. And if they don't pass it, they take the module. And if they get to the end of it, they take another test. And if they pass that test, then they go on. If they don't pass that test, then they go back to the module and take it again, and they get retested. It's a killer to implement if you're going to do. But you can do that with computers fairly well. And once you modularized everything, there's this business inside of it, Crowder's intrinsic programming, which maybe some of you run across. And I think it's far more influential in the development of what we do with computers than Skinner's extrinsic programming. So this is intrinsic programming, but you can see this is something you've all seen. You know, you ask a question, and if it's right, you go to the next question. If it's wrong, you figure what's wrong and do something about it. Very expensive to figure out what these items are. And it doesn't work tremendously well, but it works fairly well. And this seems to be in looking at use cases recently in industry and elsewhere, we found that this is the most formal, this is the most common sort of computer-based instruction. Not wonderfully effective, but it does have its moments. So you begin to look at all this, as I did probably about 15 years ago. So this means we're talking about research that's probably in the neighborhood of 20 years to 30 years old. But back then, if I gathered everything up, I found this computer-based instruction of the sort I described just now, or with strict drill and practice, you would find an effect size of 0.39. Now, I haven't said much about effect sizes, and I'm going to. But basically, and if you're looking at interactive multimedia instruction, you found an effect size of 0.50. So basically, this is raising your, your 50 percentile students up to about the 69th percentile. And if I've integrated properly into the Gaussian curve, I think this raises your 50th percentile students up to about the 60th percentile. So the stuff is working. This incidentally, when I say interactive multimedia instruction, is sort of that to let you know how old this stuff is. What I used for this was interactive video disc. It was a little while. But okay, so this stuff does seem to work. What we had been doing at that point did seem to work. And maybe I'll go ahead and figure out how to make this one work. Okay, so there's this business of what we figured at that time, back in those days, based on data like this, is that computers can teach effectively. They can be used to improve people's scores on tests, basically, is the more specific notion. And anticipating and then dealing with all possible states of the learner is time-consuming and difficult. As I say, it's costly, and it's incomplete. You really can't figure out in advance every state the student's going to get into. It just doesn't work. So the question then arose, well, if it's costly and probably only partially successful, can we get computers to do some of this authoring? They might, in fact, they might generate instruction. And that's the key behind intelligent tutoring system. It is generative, in real time, on demand, as tutorial dialogue. Now, do we have real intelligent tutoring systems yet? I would claim no, but we're getting there. We have a lot of people that claim they have intelligent tutoring systems, and a lot of them are crooks and thieves, because just because they adopt to the student, they think that they have an intelligent tutoring system. It's a good marketing ploy, but it's not what we had in mind when we began developing these things. We wanted it to be generative, really the key term.
Generative as opposed to algorithmic.
Generative as opposed to pre-stored stuff, and anticipating every state that the student's going to be in and working for them. There are people who say, well, you didn't have models of the student before. Well, you did, but they were static. They didn't learn, they didn't change, they were not generated on demand as needed. So this generative seems to be the key thing. And basically, again, we're back to an economic argument. How can we make this stuff, the capabilities of good instruction, affordable to all? Okay, does this stuff work? Okay, so here, yes, sir.
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Yep.
For the set?
If I can. Let's see. Is this going to work? No.
The other
Is
direction.
this going to work? Yes. Good.
So I'm just wondering if what you think about the idea of having, because it's so costly to develop these generative authoring systems, to have the more static algorithmic authoring systems that become very good at helping with the simplest or easiest problems that students encounter, right? So
Yes.
students that are struggling with this kind of algebra problem, 80% of them are going to struggle in this way, and so we have this system address that, and then let a human deal with the other, the things that are too costly to try and get the computer system to do.
And the magic question is, what is that trade-off?
Right.
And now does this sound familiar to you, like a discussion we had a little earlier today? I mean, let's see if I can say quickly two things about it before I get to the point that I'll actually say a little more about it. One is that for something really simple like drill and practice, which is cheap and easy to produce, you might as well go ahead and use drill and practice. People like it. I don't care what they say about drill and kill. I find that term absolutely ridiculous, because if you do it by computer, kids like it. And yeah, I mean, you can do it badly, I think. So but it's almost hard to do it badly, and it's very easy to put systems like that together. So I'll get back to the second point is, to see if I remember it, is that we're going to talk about a system that costs $40 million to produce. This is the DARPA digital tutor, $40 million. maybe a little less. Okay, so 10, tomato, tomato, maybe 35. Okay, so it's very expensive to produce, and yet, if you look at the return on investment for that, you get a return in the neighborhood of about $20 for every dollar you put into it. There's more to be said about that too, but we'll get to that in a minute or two. So yeah, you're on. I'm actually right. Some rules for meta-analysis. Okay, I got to talk about a meta-analysis here. There's some rules you got to follow when you do a meta-analysis. I mention this because there are people who say we've done a meta-analysis, and it's not a meta-analysis, just some sort of review. If you're going to do it right, and you should do it right, because the idea is that if you do any sort of study, it should be replicable. Somebody should be able to come along behind and do the same thing over again with roughly the same results. So first, you have to define what you're analyzing. You have to identify all your sources. Where did you look this stuff up? Identify your strategies. What keywords did you use? Which dates did you consider? Things of that sort. Describe your criteria for including the study or not, and use a common metric. Effect size. There's that word again, and I've still got a few things to say about effect size. I haven't been able to figure out how to pace it. So. All right, again, the key thing is that the study should be replicable. Somebody should be able to come along behind you and come up with roughly the same results. Okay, so we had a definition. Basically, we said it had to use generative models of the learner's state, the objective state, and pedagogy for getting from one to the other. In other words, here you are, this is where you are, the learner state, here's where you want to go, the objective state, and here's how you get from here to there. And this stuff should be generated by the computer in real time, on demand. And of course, these models must be dynamic, they must learn, and they must support mixed initiative. Mixed initiative means either the learner or the computer can initiate inquiries, talk, ideas, whatever. So it's mixed initiative. That was key in Jaime Carbonell's early notions behind computer-based instruction, and that goes back to the early 1970s. Sir?
Just to make sure that this group understands, when you say that the models must learn, that means the model becomes smarter, not that the student becomes smarter, but that from the interaction, both the student and the model learn something.
Right on. Yes, sir. I stand amended and
I wanted to make sure they understood the impact of that it's not just an algorithm doing this.
Now, we did a meta-analysis, and we applied this definition as well as we could. That's not to say it's perfect, but we did what we could. Is there somebody else?
It's the other side of the
Oh,
wall.
I was just wondering, graduate
It's not
student?
me.
You're starting to be up here.
I get fussy around this time.
I know how you feel, kid. Okay, so some rules. We did that, and to move on. So does this stuff work? By this stuff, I mean intelligent tutoring systems, as defined. And I'm not giving you the whole meta-analytic story here, but and I'm not figuring out how to link this thing. There. Aha. Effect size. I got to say something about effect size. Now, effect size is really simple to calculate. It's just you're going to separate you're going to determine the difference between two means, the means of two groups, and you divide it by something. And in this case, you divide it by some standard deviation. There's great discussion at this point. What standard deviation do we divide by? Do we divide by some pooled standard deviation? Okay, that's going to be the estimate of the population standard deviation. Or do you divide it by the control group standard deviation? That's that's because by administering this treatment, this instructional treatment, you're going to mess up the standard deviation that ought to be there. Do you use hedges modification to make sure that to adjust for bias, things of that sort? The discussion goes on and on and on. At this point, I've simply thrown up my hands and said, whatever. In this case, we used pooled standard deviations, which is roughly Cohen's D. It strikes me that that's the most common measure of effect size. But that's all it is. It's just a standard measure. And here are some guidelines. If it's less than 0.2 standard deviation, who cares? If it's 2 to 0.39, it's small, moderate, large. And, you know, at point 8, you know, people begin popping champagne corks. Well, all right, here they pass around the milkshakes or something. But anyway, this is a big deal if it gets over point 8. So there you raised your 50 percentile students up to about the 83rd percentile. I don't know, those of you who could do that integration are welcome to correct me. Okay, so it's a two-part study. We looked at system evaluations, evaluation of ITS systems, compared with the conventionally instructed group. And then we looked at component evaluations. We were looking for things within the the intelligent tutorial system that matter. And no, it wasn't that bad, you know. So it was, that's what we collected, you know, we found about 600 studies that said that they were intelligent tutoring systems. 600. Some of those were, you know, total nonsense. But after all that, we came down to about 45 studies that contained no substantive methodological flaws, and that we're measuring learning quantitatively and roughly the same in both groups. So what did we find? So system studies, all 45, we found an effect size of about 0.6. So that's not bad. You know, it's better than the effect size that we were finding before, 0.39, for just standard computer-based instruction. Things are getting better, we're getting better, we claim on the basis. And as a matter of fact, that they're properly aligned, there's more to be said about this in a minute, they're properly aligned between the instruction and the assessment. You bounce up to 0.75. There are some component studies we found. This was mostly a plus. We really didn't find much there. If we wanted interactive participation, where that was important, yeah, it didn't amount to much. Self-explanation didn't amount to much. And the thing is that these are all issues that are not peculiar to intelligent tutoring systems. You can look at them in any number of systems, and that's what this really requires, to do the component studies properly, and to find out what really pays off when you're using computers to teach. You need to not limit yourself, as we did, to intelligent tutoring systems. So, the findings? Okay, so these are a couple of big things that we found. You got to implement it. Now, this is something we learned many, many moons ago. But if you go into a school and you got to work with teachers, you got to get the superintendent on your side, you got to get the school administration on your side, you got to get the teachers on your side, you got to provide pre-service instruction, not just a couple of hours of here's how it is. You got to go in and spend a day or two with them, and then after that you have to provide supporting support for the teachers, supporting support for the So, all right, we've got to provide continuing support for the teacher. You have to drop in, not just when they request it, but but just drop in unannounced and say, how are you doing? Are you making sense of the reports we're giving you on how your kids are doing? Do you use the reports? Let us show you how you can use the reports, etc. Implementation is really critical. When it was done well, we got roughly a D of about 0.46. When it was done badly, you can get down around minus 0.1. There's some very good stuff that suffers from terrible implementation.
Yeah, why did you emphasize the need to drop in unannounced?
Because some people are, if you're a teacher, you're busy, and mostly you're going to spend your time doing what you know how to do, and you really don't want to mess with this new stuff that's coming in because you don't have time. Well, you do have time, but you don't have priority. So the idea is to raise the priority and show the teacher how it helps them do what they need to do anyways. And there's a wonderful system. You got to look at Hefferman's system, like assistance, because it's sort of a halfway thing. It provides intelligent tutoring for the homework assignments that teachers assign to the kids. I'm really impressed by that because mostly teachers don't want to mess with this new technology anyways. So it's interesting, but that's basically it. And they're not going to call for help because they're not going to mess with it at all. Alignment. It had to be tailored to the testing. So this is alignment between the assessment and what the curriculum was trying to do. If it was tailored properly, you get this effect size of about 0.72. If it's not, you're way down here. It might as well be nowhere with that if you don't align the two.
So I'm just trying to, so you took those 45 studies.
Yeah.
And you coded each one for if the implementation was good or not, or
Yeah.
alignment, and that's what we're getting here. Okay.
There are some huge differences here, like some of the work that Lane's done had with his Andy's physics teacher. He was down around 0.04 for some of these things, and then he would get way up, about 0.8 if it were properly aligned. And alignment usually has something to do with the level of objectives, because here the good thing about these intelligent tutoring systems is that you can get deep objectives. That is to say, at the conceptual level, and that's not something. And a lot of these things, there are some intelligent tutoring systems that are very shallow level. So what they're doing is teaching facts, simple concepts, simple procedures that you're simply supposed to memorize, and that's a waste of time, and they don't work very well.
So did you find that most of the papers that you were looking at provided a sufficient level of detail on these categories to really be able to, because I know that's one thing that Andy's talked about quite a bit, is that oftentimes we report the outcomes, but we don't provide a sufficient amount of detail on the implementation and the details of the implementation that really impact the outcome.
You will be astounded to know that the answer to that question is no. we rarely had the kind of information. We had to call people up.
Okay.
We had to, bug them, things like that. Sometimes, sometimes it's pretty well stated, enough stated for our work. But publishers scrunching down space, and they're, as long as they're in paper, they're going to be worried about the weight of their journals, and so the idea is that you get your word out. And that's why I like tech reports, because people do report their studies sometimes with much more length and much more detail than their technical reports. But then, there are different procedures for producing tech reports. Sometimes they're well reviewed, and sometimes they aren't. It's tricky business, and this is just to get a meta-analysis. Just gives you sort of a general idea of what's happening. So, and that's what I think this is provided us. Doesn't provide us the specifics that we need. So basically we find, an effect size of 0.60 overall, and an effect size of 0.75. Now, we were looking at systems evaluation, just looking at systems. Von Lane did a very interesting study that I recommend to you all on tutorial instruction. So his focus was on tutorialness. And he found 27 studies that were appropriate, and found an effect size of 0.59 overall. But again, his best thing for step-based tutoring was 0.76, which is kind of close to our effect size. So I think we probably are about this ballpark. So in standard garden variety computer-based instruction, you might well expect an effect size of about 0.4 to 0.5, and here you might expect an effect size of about 0.7. I think that's fair. Now, it's a messy statement over lots of studies and everything else, but that seems to be the general direction in which we're going. Yes, sir?
What's the difference between step-based tutoring and sub-step-based tutoring?
It's really interesting. That was something that surprised me, surprised Von Lane, surprised everybody. If a student's going along, making a step, solving a problem, right? Because this is sort of, you're doing a physics problem. And you ask exactly the wrong answer, or you try exactly the wrong thing. Now the question is, do you step in at that point and say, hey, wait a minute, that's stupid, don't do that, correct? And that's sub-step based tutoring. If you let them go ahead for a little while and let them thrash around a little bit, and then come back and try something new, or after you've been thrashing around for a while, you give them a little bit of advice, then you get this. It wasn't what I expected. Those of us who've been running rats know that you have to, provide reinforcement right away, within a half second or so. And so, we thought sub-step-based tutoring would be best. Not so. It's interesting. I recommend the paper. Great. And Van Lane does wonderful work. For those of you who are interested in tutoring, I suggest to do this probably in lieu of reading our paper. So here's the other point that I wanted to make. if you look at something like, this is Anderson and Craftlaw in 2001, it's their list of instructional strategies and objectives. And they start from the learning objectives, which are to remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create. I understand there's some problems here with evaluate, but okay, whatever. And here you got some other stuff that I fiddle with something because I don't like putting meta cognition in here. But okay, if you're down in this area here, first we see from a variety of studies, including the one that we did, that these intelligent tutoring systems just don't work very well. Not only are they very expensive to produce and wasting time and money, but they just don't do it very well. And I think it's because of the intensity with which you're throwing items at students. In drill and practice, you throw plenty of items at it. Kids like it, they're always active, they're always doing something. Well, this business of drill and kill just, well, drives me up the wall. Anyways, so I think, and I claim, that all instruction these days ought to be, in this area, ought to use computers. There's no reason to use human tutors, just to be, provocative. There's no reason to use human computers down here to do flashcard kind of stuff, to teach arithmetic, facts. What you want is to get them out in this territory where you're beginning to understand what is the nature of division, what is the nature of multiplication, what is the nature of algebra, what is the nature of carbon bonds, whatever, take your pick. So if you're just going to memorize stuff, it ought to be down here. This is where you really want the students to be. You want them at this higher level conceptual understanding of course. And for that, I think these are the systems that are going to do it. But that's that. And of course, sooner or later, they're not going to do everything. Sooner or later, you have to have a human in this. Blended instruction is important. And I'm not, again, I'm not separating students from each other. We all get together and collaborate.
I was just wondering if you noticed anything about, as you were doing that meta-analysis, about the domains that were being used with the intelligent tutoring systems. I mean, they tend to be math and science domains that are highly structured, or did you also see their use in domains like writing, language arts, social studies?
I think if you're going to study Hark the Lark or Chaucer, an opera with his shortest sword, you don't want to do that with a computer for Pete's sake, yeah. So we did look a little bit at domains, but I would also add that at some levels math itself is a fairly abstract and difficult to deal with if you really get into the concepts. So it depends at the level you're working at and everything else. But I don't, basically, so I fiddle around this answer because the answer is no, we didn't get any sort of view of that I'm satisfied with.
I know that my fifth grader right now in an elementary school here in the valley, they use, I don't know the guts of the system, so I don't know if it would actually be considered an intelligent tutoring system, but for like doing their persuasive writing, they'll go in and the system will give them scores on different aspects of their writing, grammar, and other aspects of their writing. And they get their scores up as high as they can, and then they take their papers to their teacher. But now, instead of their teacher having to grade like all of these kind of lower level kinds of things, the papers, they've already been through 5 revisions before the teacher gets through the paper.
Yeah. Use a computer. I mean, why waste the teachers are more expensive than our computers these days, and as lowly paid as they are. Okay, so how well they work? I think didn't we just go through this? There, I was going to say something about elaborate a little bit on Von Lang's work, but drill and practice, tutorials, simulation, games. You can see how they work. You really end up in the simulation game territory here when you begin to get in these higher levels. And I find it difficult to get around them. So I want to say something about the DARPA digital tutor. So it borrows the ideas from intelligent tutoring technology and constructivist notions. It's all problem solving. It's problem solving learning, basically, is what it is. But again, unlike, say, the work of NHM, where everybody's working on improving Act R or something like that, this is atheoretic. It's eclectic and pragmatic. and its validation is job performance because it's training. If you're providing education, the way you find out if you're really validating what you've done is you follow somebody through their life and see how well their education paid off. Well, that's a long study, far more expensive and complicated than you can do. But training is really cool, because training is intended to have them perform certain specific tasks that you can identify and certain jobs. And so if you want to find out if you're doing the right stuff in training, you want to know what knowledge they have, but you also go out and have them do job samples and see how well it works. And that's what we did here. So one thing, the practice was captured practices and experts, procedures and practices of subject matter experts who are also expert one-on-one tutors. So these are folks who had written books, were known authorities, national authorities in the areas that they were going to be tutoring in, but they were also had to be good tutors. So they were auditioned. We had about a 30-minute audition, and they would sit down with a representative student, and they could teach anything they wanted to, but they had to do that for about 30 minutes, and if they did that poorly, and some of these folks were very good in classroom setting or group setting, it turned out that they didn't choose them. Sir?
So were your criteria for evaluating their effectiveness as a tutor in that 30-minute session, were those theoretically based, were those practically based in terms of this worked well, what they did, or were you looking for specific things?
We were looking for specific things. We had a checklist of things they should do or shouldn't do, and that's what we that's what we used. So it was pretty good, and that was unusual because most of these intelligent tutoring systems, when they attempt to clone a tutor, are not very careful. Nowhere near as careful as this in choosing what tutors they're going to try to clone. Okay, why information technology? Well, this is information systems technologies. They're training IT people aspiring to the IT rating in the Navy. This is networks, system administrators, topologies of networks, client-server relationships, all those good things that go on in information systems technology. So, and things, it's an incredibly difficult task. If you have a problem, it could be the particular station they're working at, it could be the connection of that station to the network, it could be the network, it could be the network connection to the server, it could be the server itself. There's anywhere in all this mess that the problem could occur. It's a very, very difficult task. The people we brought in, the people in Navy trainings are 19-year-olds, usually rated above, usually scoring above the 80th percentile in the ASVAB, rather not the ASVAB, but the AFQT, which is not so much an intelligence test, but is probably as close to an intelligence test as the services give. And so they're smarter than the average kid, but again, they are not people who succeeded in school. Usually they weren't particularly interested in school, wasn't serving anything that they liked, and so they enter the Navy and they are given tremendous responsibility. If the IT system goes down in one of these systems, in a ship, it sits in the dock. It can't do anything, and when it sits in the dock, it's going to cost well in tens of millions of dollars to pay. So that's expensive. So we did 5 IT/DT assessments. I'm not going to discuss them all, but the main focus is on job performance, not necessarily knowledge. I'll let one thing out of that because I forgot to include it, is that we gave a knowledge test, and then we gave practical troubleshooting test, and the correlation between the knowledge test and the practical troubleshooting test, the knowledge test accounted for about 40% of the performance, the variance in performance on the troubleshooting test. About 40%. So that practical exercise is really important. We used Cohen's D. We don't like that. We gave the standard deviations. Also, the reports that we have, I've got reports from all these, but the reports I have are all data reports. They are intended to tell the Navy whether or not the Navy should continue to fund this stuff and begin to implement it. They're not research reports. Such need to be written. So phase 1, we had a phase 1 test, and in this case, remember we had these tutors come in and train the kids. So the tutors, the human tutors who came in to train the kids, we're training them in IT matters. And the comparison in this case was against experienced fleet ITs, fleet information technology specialists, who had 4 to 18 years. It averaged out to about 7.5 years of experience in the Navy doing actual IT jobs. And so we had a written test, practical troubleshooting, system building, and we had dockside and deployed observations, and Mike will say anything about those. So for the written test, so we got this is kids who've been trained for 16 weeks, kids who've had less than 6 months in the Navy itself, being compared against people in the fleet with 7 years experience on average. So, and we got an effect size of 1.2, which means you're raising them up pretty high. On the digital tutor proportion, we had 1 week of the digital tutor prepared, so we compared that, and we got that sort of effect size. Remember, 0.8 is considered to be a large effect size, so we're getting this sort of stuff. And practical troubleshooting exercise, the data wouldn't allow calculation of effect size there. System building exercise as well. Yeah, anyway, we've got to move on here. So the comparison, we compared 8 weeks against 16-week integrated learning environment and 19-week IT of the future graduates. I need to say more about that, but I'll say more about it in a minute. Anyways, I want to point out to you that we've got some very, very large effect sizes here. I mean, this is almost 5 the standard deviations. And the ITOF kids, you know, this is 16 weeks versus 8 weeks. ITOF, this is 8 weeks versus 19 weeks, excuse me. And yet we get this is an effect size in the knowledge test. And the practical exercises, again, we have good stuff, and so forth. I want to get to the real thing. This is where we compared, this is phase 2 IWAR. I'm sorry, it's the DOD, so I'm going to say or something. Okay, so we had the comparison group with 16-week graduates, 35-week graduates of something called the IT training continuum. This is largely classroom instruction. So it's really classroom instruction versus computer-based ITX system. And also, again, we brought in the forward experienced fleet ITs who felt like they were lambs being brought to slaughter. Okay, so again, for the digital tutor versus the fleet, we get this. But then interesting, we note that the digital tutor, then for the digital tutor versus the ITPC, we get this. So we're getting these huge, huge effect sizes. But even the IT versus the fleet did well. The classroom learning piece, because this was 35 weeks, very, very carefully chosen instructors doing the best they could do using classroom instruction. So that's the ITPC. Practical exercises, we're getting the same sort of business coming up here. And then, of course, IT versus the fleet, they're about the same. So the fleet, the problem with it, it's not really fair to the fleet guys when it comes down to it, because the fleet folks are, they're assigned all sorts of jobs, and they may be stuck in some sort of area. So, thank you. So I just wanted to say that we got some big results there. How does it work? Here are some of the things. We got spiral curriculum with authentic experience. Teach something, go do a problem, and then come back and teach it at a higher level. Go do a more difficult problem and ricochet around like that. And then, of course, as you raise up in the conceptual level, you're also coming into other areas that you have to consider. Appropriate conceptual levels, cloning the tutorial experience, all these sorts of things. So, there.
These reports are obtainable, is that right?
Yeah. And we looked at the return on investment over a 12-year period. So this is what's going on in steady state. And here we are implementing the computer. So it gets implemented after the 4th year, come down here. And if you look at the return on investment after this 12-year period, and these are all the assumptions that are in it, you save the present value difference is approximately $1.3 billion with a B. So $40 million, remember, to produce this stuff, $1 billion, $3 billion, say. Yes, sir.
I don't know if you'd have to kill us or not, but could we get links to these slides?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And would you have to kill us?
Well, I have to take that up with management, but we'll see what they say. It's a,
So
and they will take roll, is that?
the next class teacher is gonna kill us, because I.
Yeah, I know, we have to let everybody up.
So we all move down to the.
Thanks for